The morning sun painted golden streaks across the crystal-clear water of my backyard pool, and I couldn't help but smile as I adjusted the temperature controls on my brand-new smart pool system. After months of saving every penny from my job, at the local tech startup, I had finally moved into my dream home in Maple Grove Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the houses were spaced just far enough apart to give you privacy, but close enough that you could still wave to your neighbors over the perfectly manicured hedges. It was barely 8 a.m. on a Saturday, and I was already excited about christening my pool with its first official swim. The previous owners had left it covered and neglected, but I'd spent the last 3 weeks working with pool contractors, cleaning, services, and landscapers to transform the backyard into my personal oasis. New tiles gleamed like sapphires around the pool's edge, and the recently installed waterfall feature created a soothing symphony that made me feel like I was at a luxury resort. I had deliberately chosen this early hour for my inaugural swim, knowing that most of my neighbors would still be sleeping in on their weekend. The last thing I wanted was to disturb anyone with splashing sounds or the gentle hum of the pool's filtration system. As a 28-year-old black software developer who had worked 3 jobs to afford this place, I was acutely aware that I was one of the few people of color in this predominantly white neighborhood. Not that it should matter, but experience had taught me to be extra considerate, extra quiet, extra careful about everything I did. I slipped into my favorite navy blue swim trunks and grabbed a fluffy white towel from the linen closet. The morning air was crisp but warming quickly. Perfect pool weather. As I stepped out onto my back patio, breathing in the scent of the jasmine flowers I'd planted along the fence line, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was it. This was the American dream I'd been working toward since I was a kid, growing up in a cramped apartment across town. The water was absolutely perfect, exactly 78 degrees, just warm enough to be comfortable, but cool enough to be refreshing. I eased myself down the pool steps, savoring that first moment when the water reached my waist, then my chest. The stress of the work week melted away as I pushed off from the wall and began swimming slow, deliberate laps. Freestyle, backstroke, a few clumsy attempts at butterfly that made me laugh out loud. The sound echoed off the water and the surrounding fence, creating a joyful bubble of contentment around me. For about 20 minutes, it was absolute paradise. I floated on my back, staring up at the clear blue sky, watching a few wispy clouds drift by. Birds chirped in the old oak tree that straddled the property line between my yard and my neighbor's. The pool's automatic cleaning system hummed quietly in the background, and I found myself thinking about how I might invite my parents over for a barbecue next weekend. Mom would love the new outdoor kitchen setup, and Dad would get a kick out of the smart pool controls that I could operate from my phone. That's when I heard it. A sharp, aggressive voice cutting through my peaceful morning like a rusty knife through silk. "Excuse me! Excuse me! What do you think you're doing?" I immediately stopped floating and treaded water, looking around in confusion. The voice was coming from the direction of the neighboring house, a pristine colonial with shutters so white, they practically glowed. Standing at the property line, hands planted firmly on her hips, was a woman I'd never seen before. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair that looked like it had been set with industrial strength, hairspray, and she was wearing a pink velour tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "I'm sorry?" I called out, genuinely confused. I was clearly in my own backyard, in my own pool, on my own property. What could possibly be the problem? "Don't you I'm sorry me, young man," she shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that probably sent every dog in the neighborhood running for cover. "I know exactly what you're doing, and I've already called the police." My heart started hammering in my chest, that familiar fight-or-flight response that every black person knows too well. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. This is my house, my pool." "Oh, please," she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Do you think I'm stupid? I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I know every single person who belongs here. You're obviously some kind of burglar or trespasser, and you think you can just help yourself to someone else's pool while they're away." I felt the water suddenly feel cold around me, despite the perfect temperature. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not at my own home, not on what was supposed to be the perfect start to my weekend. I swam to the edge of the pool closest to where she was standing, making sure to keep my movements slow and non-threatening. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus Johnson, and I bought this house 3 weeks ago. I have all the paperwork, the deed, the mortgage documents. This is definitely my property." I tried to keep my voice calm and respectful, even though my pulse was racing. "Karen," she said, as if that explained everything. "Karen Morrison. And I don't care what kind of fake documents you think you have. The family that lived here, the Hendersons, they were a nice white family with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They would never sell to someone like you." The words hit me like a physical blow, someone like me. There it was. The thing that had been lurking beneath the surface of this entire interaction, finally dragged into the harsh light of day. "Mrs. Morrison," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "the Hendersons did indeed sell the house. To me, 3 weeks ago. I can show you the closing documents if you'd like." "I don't need to see any forged paperwork," she snapped. "I've already called 911 and they're sending officers over right now. We'll see how long your little story holds up when the police get here." As if summoned by her words, I heard the distant wail of sirens getting closer. My stomach dropped. This was really happening. I was about to be confronting police officers while I was wet, half naked, and standing in my own backyard, all because this woman couldn't believe that a young black man could legitimately own a house in her precious neighborhood. I hauled myself out of the pool, grabbed my towel, and tried to think quickly. I needed to get my documents, needed to have proof ready before the officers arrived. But I also didn't want to go inside and potentially escalate the situation by making any sudden movements. "Karen," I said, using her name deliberately, "before the police get here, would you be willing to let me show you my proof of ownership? I really think this is just a misunderstanding that we can clear up." "Oh, I'm sure you've got all kinds of excuses," she replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "But I know what I see. A suspicious person using someone else's property without permission. The police will sort this out." The sirens were getting closer now, and I could see the flashing lights reflecting off the windows of houses down the street. My hands were shaking, not from the cool morning air, but from a combination of anger, fear, and disbelief. This was 2024, in a progressive city, in what I thought was a welcoming neighborhood. But here I was, living out every black homeowner's nightmare scenario. I wrapped the towel around my waist and walked toward my back door, moving slowly and deliberately. "I'm going to get my documents," I announced clearly, making sure Karen could hear me. "My phone, my deed, my driver's license, everything that proves I live here." "Don't you dare go into that house," she yelled. "That's breaking and entering." But I was already at my door, punching in the security code on the smart lock I'd installed just last week. The familiar beep and click of the lock disengaging felt like a small victory. At least my own house still recognized me, even if my neighbor didn't. Inside, I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and the folder where I kept all my important documents. My hands were still trembling as I rifled through the papers. Deed, mortgage documents, homeowner's insurance policy, utility bills with my name and this address. Everything I needed to prove that this was, unequivocally, my home. As I walked, back outside, I could see 2 police cruisers pulling into my driveway. 4 officers got out, and I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I'd never had a particularly bad interaction with police, but I also knew that the situation I was walking into was exactly the kind that could go wrong in 100 different ways. "Officers," I called out, raising my hand in greeting while keeping the folder of documents visible in my other hand. "I'm Marcus Johnson, and this is my house. I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The lead officer, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, nodded and approached me. "Sir, we received a call about a possible trespassing situation. Can you tell me what's going on here?" Before I could answer, Karen's voice cut through the air like a fire alarm. "Officers! Thank goodness you're here!" This man was swimming in the pool and he claims he owns the house, but I know for a fact that's impossible. The real owners are the Henderson family, and they would never— "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, holding up his hand to stop her, mid-sentence. "Let me talk to this gentleman first, and then I'll get your statement." I took a deep breath and began explaining the situation, showing the officers my driver's license, my deed, my mortgage paperwork. The lead officer examined each. What I didn't expect was for the complications to begin less than 2 hours later, and certainly not in the way they did. I had just finished getting dressed and was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to process the morning's events, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see an elderly black woman standing on my porch, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish and wearing a concerned expression. "Mr. Johnson," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Dorothy Williams from 3 houses down, the blue house with the rose garden. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but I witnessed what happened this morning, and I felt I needed to speak with you." I invited her in, grateful for what seemed like the first friendly face I'd encountered in the neighborhood. Dorothy appeared, to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She set the casserole dish on my counter and shook her head sadly. "That was absolutely disgraceful behavior from Karen Morrison," she said without preamble. "But I'm afraid what you experienced this morning is just the tip of the iceberg, and there are some things about your neighbor and about this house that you need to know." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Dorothy settled into one of my kitchen chairs and folded her hands in her lap. "Marcus, may I call you Marcus? I've lived in this neighborhood since 1987. I've seen families come and go, watched children grow up, attended more block parties and barbecues than I can count, and in all that time Karen Morrison has been, let's call her challenging." "Challenging how?" "She's appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator, property value protector, and general busybody," Dorothy said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But her real issue is that she has very specific ideas about who belongs in Maple Grove Estates, and those ideas haven't evolved much since 1955. I poured Dorothy a cup of coffee, my hands still slightly shaky. "So this morning wasn't an isolated incident?" "Oh, honey, no." Dorothy shook her head sadly. 3 years ago, she called the police on the Martinez family's teenage son for suspicious behavior. He was washing his parents' car in their own driveway. Last year, she reported our mailman Jerome as a potential package thief because he's black and she wasn't used to seeing him on the route. The poor man had been delivering mail for the Postal Service for 15 years. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "How does she get away with this?" "Because until now, she's been clever about it," Dorothy explained. "She never explicitly mentions race. It's always about suspicious behavior, or people who don't belong, or protecting property values. And frankly, most of the neighborhood is white and middle class, so her complaints don't directly affect them. It's easier to look the other way." I leaned against my kitchen counter, feeling the weight of what Dorothy was telling me. "So, what you're saying is that I'm going to be dealing with this for as long as I live here?" "That's what I thought," Dorothy said, her eyes beginning to twinkle with something that might have been mischief. "Until I did a little research after this morning's incident." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder that looked suspiciously similar to the one I'd used to prove my ownership of the house. "Marcus, what do you know about the previous owners of your home?" "The Hendersons?" "Not much, honestly. My real estate agent mentioned they were relocating for work, and they seemed eager to sell quickly. I got the house for slightly under asking price, which I thought was just good timing on my part." Dorothy opened her folder and spread several documents across my kitchen table. "The Hendersons were indeed the previous owners, but they only lived here for 18 months. Before that, this house was owned by the Patterson family for 12 years, and before that," she paused dramatically, "it was owned by Karen Morrison herself." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "What?" "Oh yes," Dorothy continued, clearly enjoying my shocked expression. "Karen lived in this house from 1998 to 2010. She and her husband bought it as their dream home, spent a fortune renovating it, put in that beautiful pool you were enjoying this morning." My mind was racing. So when she was screaming about knowing every person who belongs in this neighborhood, she was standing in the backyard of her former home, looking at the pool she used to swim in every morning, telling you that you didn't belong there. Dorothy's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. The irony is rather delicious, don't you think? I sat down hard in the chair across from her. But why did she sell? And why is she still living right next door? Dorothy's expression grew more serious. That's where the story gets interesting, and frankly, quite sad. Karen's husband, Richard, was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's in 2009. The medical bills piled up quickly, and they needed to downsize. They sold this house and bought the smaller colonial next door so they could stay in the neighborhood. I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. That's actually heartbreaking. It is, Dorothy agreed. Richard passed away 2 years ago, and Karen has been living alone ever since. I think seeing new people in what she still considers her house has been difficult for her. But that doesn't excuse her behavior, especially not the racial undertones. We sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. Then Dorothy pulled out another document that made my eyes widen. "There's more," she said. "I did some digging in the county records, and I discovered something that Karen probably doesn't know, something that's going to change everything." The document she showed me was a property survey from 1987, when the original lots were divided and the houses were built. According to the survey, the property line between my house and Karen's was incorrectly marked when the houses were constructed. "What does this mean exactly?" I asked, though I was starting to get an idea. "It means," Dorothy said with a grin, that was definitely mischievous now, that about 3 feet of Karen's backyard, including her prize-winning rose garden that she's so proud of, is actually on your property. My jaw dropped. The roses garden that Karen had mentioned in our brief conversation, the one I could see from my pool area, the one she clearly spent hours tending and was immensely proud of. It was on my land. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Dorothy nodded. I had my son-in-law, who's a surveyor, double-check the measurements. "It's definitely your property. The question is, what are you going to do with this information?" Before I could answer, my doorbell rang again. This time, when I looked through the peephole, I saw Karen Morrison standing on my porch. She looked significantly less combative than she had this morning, but I could see she was holding an envelope in her hands. "It's Karen," I told Dorothy, who immediately stood up and began gathering her documents. "Perfect timing," she whispered. "Don't mention what I've told you yet. Let's see what she has to say first." I opened the door to find Karen looking distinctly uncomfortable. She was no longer wearing the pink velour tracksuit, having changed into a more conservative blue dress that looked like something she might wear to church. "Marcus," she said, and I was surprised that she actually used my name. I came to apologize." This was definitely not what I had expected. "Oh, okay. May I come in? I have something I need to give you, and I'd rather not do this on your front porch where the whole neighborhood can see." I glanced back at Dorothy, who nodded encouragingly, then stepped aside to let Karen enter. She stopped short when she saw Dorothy sitting at my kitchen table. "Dorothy," Karen said stiffly, "I didn't know you were here." "Hello, Karen," Dorothy replied with remarkable composure. "I was just welcoming Marcus to the neighborhood properly." Karen's cheeks flushed slightly, and I could see her struggling with what to say next. Finally, she turned to me and held out the envelope she'd been carrying. "This is a formal apology letter," she said, "and a check to cover any inconvenience I may have caused you this morning. I also wanted to explain, to try to help you understand why I reacted the way I did." I took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. "I'm listening." Karen sat down at my kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "This house," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "was my home for 12 years. My husband, Richard, and we bought it as newlyweds. We raised our daughter here. We hosted countless dinner parties, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings." Her voice broke slightly, and I found myself feeling that same unexpected sympathy I'd experienced when Dorothy first told me Karen's story. We put that pool in for our daughter's 16th birthday, Karen continued. Richard worked overtime for months to pay for it. Some of my happiest memories are of summer mornings, swimming laps while he read the newspaper on the patio. Dorothy and I exchanged glances, but neither of us interrupted. When Richard got sick, Karen went on, we had to make some difficult decisions. Selling this house was the hardest thing I've ever done. Moving next door was supposed to make it easier. I could still see the home we'd built together, still feel connected to those memories. She looked up at me, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. But it hasn't been easier. It's been torture. Every day I look out my window and see strangers living in my house, using my pool, changing things. And when I saw you this morning, she paused, clearly struggling with